The year is 1396 and Bayezid is victorious in his military campaigns against the invading Crusader army led by King Sigismund of Hungary. The decisive Ottoman victory over the Crusaders at Nicopolis increased European fears of the Ottomans while adding to Ottoman prestige throughout the Islamic world. After the battle, Bayezid now faced the most crucial decision in his reign yet. Should he take advantage of his victory at Nicopolis to move further into Europe, or return to Anatolia to eliminate the Turkish beyliks who were still a threat to his rear? While Bayezid was campaigning against the Crusaders at Nicopolis, the Karaman Beylik led by Alaaddin Bey had launched an invasion into Ottoman Anatolia, which reached all the way to the regional capital of Ankara. This was actually Alaaddin Bey's third invasion against the Ottoman Empire, in which he was previously repulsed by Sultan Murat I in 1386 and Sultan Bayezid I in 1390. This time, however, Alaaddin Bey had mustered a huge force and he had secured an alliance with Timur, the emir of the Timurid Empire to the east. The situation in Anatolia was dire. After spending a couple of weeks in Europe, Bayezid would choose to secure his eastern flank rather than invading Europe so that in the future he could not have to worry about Anatolia being raided by the Turkish beyliks in the region. Before returning to Edirne, Bayezid invaded and annexed Vidin from King Ayhan Stratimur, who had betrayed the Ottomans when he allowed the Crusader army under King Sigismund to march into Ottoman Bulgaria freely. The last real medieval king of Bulgaria would be taken prisoner and sent to the old Ottoman capital Bursa, where he would be strangled to death. The last independent Bulgarian state fell to the Ottomans, and the 500-year Ottoman rule over Bulgaria would begin. Even though Bayezid was leaving for Anatolia, he wanted his presence in Europe to be felt, so he ordered Ottoman Akanji horsemen to raid deep into Wallachia, Hungary, Bosnia, and Austria. Bayezid wanted to soften these Christian nations while he was away, so that when he returned to Europe one day, he could easily defeat these states. After marching down south, Bayezid would also start the third siege of Constantinople, since he outlived the previous siege when he led his besieging army to Nicopolis against the invading Crusader army. This time, the Byzantines had no one to call for help, so Emperor Manuel II had to accept Bayezid's demands of establishing a Turkish quarter and a mosque in Constantinople and increased tribute. During this siege, the Anadolu Hisarı was built on the Bosphorus to control Byzantine access to the Black Sea and to the Mediterranean Sea. The Ottoman stranglehold over the Byzantine Empire was tightening ever so slowly. After Bayezid lifted the siege of Constantinople, he started his march to Anatolia for his next military campaign. By this time, Alaaddin Bey of Karaman had advanced up through the former Germanic territory towards the old Ottoman capital Bursa. When Bayezid and his larger army crossed over to Anatolia, Alaaddin Bey started his retreat back to Karaman lands in the hopes of luring Bayezid into a long siege at the Karaman capital of Konya until Timur could reinforce him. However, the lightning-fast Ottoman army under Bayezid outpaced and cornered Alaaddin Bey near Akçay, in which he routed the Karaman ruler and executed him shortly after the battle. Resolved to eliminate the Karaman Beylik altogether, Bayezid annexed the Beylik and imprisoned Alaaddin Bey's two sons. Alaaddin Bey, the Bey that waged war against the Ottomans on 3 separate occasions and had been a nuisance for the Ottomans for many decades, was finally dead. In 1398, Bayezid would continue his Anatolian campaign by securing the Black Sea coast from the Genoese and Byzantine settlements, reaching all the way up to the Empire Trabzon. The last major states in opposition to Bayezid in Anatolia were the Entranids. The leader of the Beylik, Kadir Burhanuddin, died in 1398, which caused internal divisions in the Beylik, making it easier for Bayezid to occupy the region. In return for submitting to Bayezid, the Entranid nobles demanded that the Ottomans protect them against the white sheep Turkmens in the east who were raiding into their land, which Bayezid gladly accepted their terms. After securing his eastern flank, Bayezid turned his attention down south. The two small Turkish beyliks of Ramazan and Dul Qadir were Mamluk buffer states at the time of Bayezid's campaign into Anatolia. However, when the Mamluk Sultan died in 1399 and his replacement was an inexperienced kid, Bayezid quickly took advantage of the situation and occupied both of the beyliks with ease. Bayezid had finally united all the Turkish beyliks in Anatolia under his control, but a threat from the far east was still looming ever so slightly towards the empire. During the late 1200s, the once unstoppable Mongol Empire went into full decline, which saw it splitting into 4 separate khanates. Local warlords from these khanates vied for power amongst each other, seeking to fill the void left by the Mongol Empire. One of these warlords were Timur, who was from the crumbling Chagatai Khanate. Timur was the leader of the Barlish tribe, a Turco-Mongolian tribe which resided in Central Asia. He and his tribe would conduct small-scale raids in their neighbors' territories throughout the 1360s and 70s, which would snowball into full conquest of cities and kingdoms. The highly successful conquest of Timur made him one of the strongest figures in the Middle East. By the 1370s, Timur had control of most of Central Asia, and his conquest continued westwards, and by 1389, he had full control over modern-day Iran and most of the Caucasus. Timur's goal was to reunite the Mongol Empire under his control. Timur's invasions resulted in one of the bloodiest chapters in human history. Entire cities were reduced to ashes, and their populations were enslaved if they were brave enough to resist the warlord. Timur had hailed himself as the successor to the late great Genghis Khan through blood connections and by his conquests. By the late 1390s, Timur had reached the gates of the Ottoman Empire, and the leader of both of the states prepared for a future conflict amongst each other. Timur was displeased with Bayezid for annexing the Karaman Beylik, who were his allies in the region, so relations between the two leaders were already strained. When Bayezid annexed the Turkish beyliks in eastern Anatolia, some of the nobles from those beyliks had fled to the courts of Timur in the hopes of trying to convince the warlord into attacking Bayezid. Timur instead wanted to compromise, so he began sending letters to Bayezid in the hopes of preventing a conflict between their two empires. The letters between the two leaders only caused tensions to rise between the pair, as both Timur and Bayezid were playing a war of words with each other. As things weren't going anywhere, Timur started to make demands on Bayezid. The demands were for Bayezid to give back the lands that he had annexed from the Turkish beys that had escaped to the Timurid court. Secondly, Timur demanded Bayezid to release QARAYUSUF and Ahmet Jalari and send them back to him. QARAYUSUF and Ahmet Jalari were the leaders of the Black Sheep Turks and the Jalarids respectively, and when Timur invaded their kingdoms, both leaders fled to the courts of Bayezid for protection from Timur. Timur lastly wanted Bayezid to give one of his sons to him as hostage in order to preserve the peace between their two states. The proud Ottoman Sultan would reject Timur's demands and send his own demands back to the Asian warlord. The demands by Bayezid were for Timur to send those Turkish beys from the eastern Anatolia back to him, and for Timur to stop interfering with Ottoman politics in Anatolia. After all of his victories and successes on the battlefield, Bayezid felt like he could take on Timur if the Asian warlord ever invaded Anatolia, which made negotiations between the two men go nowhere. After conquering Armenia and Georgia during the spring of 1400, Timur would launch a military campaign against the Mamluks in order to prevent the Ottomans from allying themselves with the Mamluks against him. The campaign was a huge victory for Timur, and by 1401 his army would sack Aleppo and Damascus in order to cut off the Ottomans away from the Mamluks. The Ottomans were cut off from the rest of the Islamic world. The war between the two prominent leaders in the Islamic world was just about to begin. During the spring of 1402, Timur's army crossed into Ottoman territory and captured the key supply city of Sivas away from Bayezid. After capturing Sivas, Timur and his army marched to Ankara to besiege the city in order to lure Bayezid to attack his army. He wanted to lure the Ottoman army onto the plains near Ankara, where his mounted horse archers could melt away Bayezid's forces, who were mostly on foot. Sultan Bayezid, who at the time was yet again besieging Constantinople, heard about Timur's invasion, so he lifted the siege of Constantinople and started to gather his troops for the upcoming war. By June of 1402, Bayezid and his Ottoman host had arrived at Ankara only to see that Timur's forces had retreated to the woodlands to the east. Timur's plan was to push Bayezid into an offensive war and exhaust the Ottoman army, so he proceeded in raiding eastern Anatolia in the hopes of luring Bayezid away from his defensive position at Ankara. Bayezid took the bait and proceeded to march his army towards the east, where he believed Timur's army was still encamped. But when he arrived in the eastern woodlands of Anatolia, he was shocked to find out that his scouts had lost track of the entire Timurid army. The Timurid army under Timur seemed to have disappeared, but in reality, while Bayezid was marching towards the east, Timur had been secretly marching his army down south to the city of Kayseri and occupied it and started his march towards Ankara to besiege the city once more in order to cut off Bayezid's supply route from the west. Bayezid, realizing that he had been outplayed by Timur, started to force march his exhausted army back towards Ankara. The forced march through Anatolia during the hot summer without having a stable supply line caused desertion in the Ottoman army. Timur had poisoned every water supply in the region, which caused the Ottoman army to run out of water in the middle of the hot summer in Anatolia. The 100,000 strong Ottoman army is said to have lost more than 20,000 troops during the forced march back to Ankara. By July 20th, the tired Ottoman army had reached the outskirts of Ankara and began preparing for battle against Timur. The Battle of Ankara was about to begin. Timur's army was structured like a classical Mongol army consisting of mostly light horse archers and armored lancers. Timur's sons commanded the flanks of the Timurid army while he himself commanded the center. Timur also had 32 armored war elephants in which he had positioned them in the vanguard of the army. Timur had acquired the war elephants during his military campaigns in India, and now he was going to use them against Bayezid. Although we don't know the exact size of Timur's army, the common number accepted by today's historians ranges Timur's army about being 100,000 strong. By the time Bayezid had arrived at Ankara, his army consisted of about 80,000 troops and his men were tired and dehydrated. Bayezid had encamped his troops to the north of Ankara, which had small mountains, in order to have the high ground over Timur. The Ottoman army was made out of a mix of troops throughout the empire. The main bulk of the Ottoman army was made out of Ghazi infantrymen, Azab archers, Spahi cavalrymen, and various other troops from the Muslim and Christian vassals from Anatolia and from the Balkans. Bayezid would also bring with him a contingent of Tartar mercenaries who were displaced by Timur's conquests in Asia. Among the Ottoman vassals that were present for the battle were Stefan Lazarevic, the despot of Serbia, and Durat Brankovic, the son of Vuk Brankovic, the Serbian lord that was imprisoned by Bayezid 6 years ago for refusing the Ottoman call to participate during the battles of Rovine and Nicopolis. Bayezid's sons also participated in the battle, with Shehzade Mehmed holding the Ottoman right, while Shehzade Suleiman was holding the Ottoman left. Shehzade Musa, Isa, and Mustafa in the meanwhile would hold the Ottoman center with their Sultan father. The Battle of Ankara had just begun. The battle started when both armies advanced towards each other, meeting on Chubuk Field as the hot Anatolian sun was beaming on both armies. The fighting was even for most of the day until the heavily armored Serbian knights under Stefan Lazarevic on the Ottoman left broke through Timur's line of light infantrymen. During the aftermath of the battle, Timur would comment on this point of the battle by stating that the Serbian knights fought like lions, showing how courageous Stefan Lazarevic's men were during the battle. But then, the turning point of the battle commenced. Bayezid's Tartar reserves on his left flank suddenly defected to Timur's side after being bribed by the Asian warlord earlier in the battle. The Tartars smashed into the back of the Ottoman left flank, killing thousands of Turks and Serbians alike. The Ottoman left flank was crumbling. Things were going better on the Ottoman right flank as Shehzada Mehmed and his Spahi cavalrymen pushed back Timur's forces. Timur would respond by sending his reserves to the Ottoman right flank in the hopes of conducting a counterattack on Shehzada Mehmed. Then, disaster struck for the Ottomans. The Turkish vassal leaders from the former Anatolian beyliks who were fighting alongside with Shehzada Mehmed switched sides to Timur after hearing the collapse of the Ottoman left flank. These Turkish beys, seeing the course of the battle, decided to defect to Timur in the hopes of that the Asian warlord would grant their beyliks independence from the Ottomans. The Ottoman right flank was now crumbling as Timur's army was breaking through Ottoman lines. Sultan Bayezid watched from the Ottoman center as his Grand Ottoman army disintegrated. The remaining forces on the Ottoman left flank under Shehzada Suleiman and his Serbian allies broke out of the Tartar encirclement and withdrew from the battle as the Ottoman right flank under Shehzada Mehmed did the same. Shehzada Isa, who was commanding the Ottoman center, also withdrew from the battle, seeing all was lost. Sultan Bayezid and his sons Shehzada Musa and Shehzada Mustafa took whatever was left of the Ottoman army and retreated to the nearby mountain of Chaltatepe to mount a final defensive stand against Timur's army. Bayezid's elite Janissary Guard held back waves of Timur's men for the rest of the evening, but to no avail. As Sultan Bayezid was trying to withdraw from the battlefield, an arrow struck his horse, causing the Sultan to be thrown to the ground. Being surrounded on all sides, Bayezid and the remnants of the Ottoman army surrendered. For the first and only time in Ottoman history, an Ottoman Sultan was captured by foreign forces during battle. The Battle of Ankara was over. The battle was a bloody affair for both sides, which saw Bayezid and Timur both lose almost half their armies. After the battle, many European writers claimed that Bayezid was mistreated by Timur during the aftermath of the battle, which saw Timur put Bayezid in a golden cage as a way to humiliate the proud Sultan. However, writers and historians from Timur's own court reported that Bayezid was treated well and that even Timur had mourned his death a year later. Bayezid and his two sons, Shehzada Musa and Shehzada Mustafa, would be sent to the Timurid capital of Samarkand, where they would be held captive. Less than a year after the Battle of Ankara, Bayezid would die in captivity, possibly due to bronchitis or committing suicide by drinking poison from one of his lavish rings. Sultan Bayezid I, the Sultan that had ruled the Ottoman Empire for 13 years, and fought in countless battles in the Balkans and Anatolia, was dead. When Bayezid ascended to the Ottoman throne back in 1389, he had stabilized the empire after the Pyrrhic victory at Kosovo, and he would spend the next decade conquering lands in the Balkans and in Anatolia, with his lightning-fast military campaigns which brought glory to the empire, only to be defeated and leave an empire in civil war. Sultan Bayezid I was one of the most ambitious and successful sultans in Ottoman history. Sultan Bayezid spent most of his life on the battlefield going on military campaigns ever since he was a young Shehzadeh under his father's command. Unlike his predecessors before him, Bayezid was a military man first and a statesman second. Bayezid let his Grand Vizier Jandarazadeh Ali Pasha take care of the state while he was off fighting in wars. The story of Sultan Bayezid I is one of a person rising so fast to success, just to suddenly fall to defeat and despair. The Battle of Ankara was one of the biggest defeats the Ottoman Empire faced in its 600-year-old history. During the aftermath of the battle, the Ottoman state was in shambles as the sons of Bayezid vied for power amongst each other as the empire around them was collapsing, and it was a miracle that the Ottomans ever managed to rebuild their state during the aftermath of the battle. Although the Ottoman Empire seemed dead for the moment, its story would continue for another 500 years. But sadly enough, the story of Sultan Bayezid I, the fourth reigning Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, was over. Enjoyed the video? Why not subscribe and hit the like button down below? This has been Ege from the Ottoman History Hub, wishing to see you next time.